Ahead in this edition of The Human Body, you'll learn that breathing isn't quite as straightforward as it seems. Find out all the organs that make up your respiratory system. You'll also discover how the exchange of gases in your cells enable you to carry out functions that are vital for life. And what do you have in common with a car? You'll find out if you stay tuned to this edition of The Human Body. Hello, I'm Mike Dowling. Welcome to this edition of The Human Body. Every morning you wake up, hit the snooze alarm 2 or 3 times, or 5 or 6 if you're like me, and fall out of bed. You stagger to the shower, eyes still closed, waiting for the first burst of water to shatter your illusions of sleep. You do the same thing morning after morning without ever stopping to think about it. You don't have to think about it because these actions have become routine. Many of your bodily functions and processes occur in the same way, like digestion or the beating of your heart, for example. These actions are involuntary, which means they happen consistently and repeatedly without any conscious thought or planning on your part. Coughing and sneezing are other examples. This is a good thing. If you had to tell your heart to beat 70 times a minute or remind your stomach to digest a burger, you could never keep up. Breathing is no different. You must breathe to live. Breathing brings in air, which contains the gas oxygen. Like most living things, humans must have oxygen to burn food and to produce energy in the body. This process is called respiration. Now, the principal purpose of respiration is to produce energy by supplying the cells of the body with oxygen and to remove waste carbon dioxide produced by cellular activities. The respiratory system is divided into 2 parts: the upper respiratory system, which includes the nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, and bronchi, and the lower respiratory system, which is made up of the lungs and related muscles like the diaphragm and other muscles in the chest and throat. Respiration really has 2 meanings. One is breathing, primarily a mechanical function of air being drawn into and pumped out of the lungs. This exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the environment and the respiratory organs is called external respiration. Now, the other meaning refers to the chemical process of producing energy in the cells. This is internal respiration, which involves the exchange of gases between the cells and the blood. Now, the series of chemical reactions in which a cell uses oxygen to break down food molecules in order to obtain energy is called cellular respiration. Reporter Alice Look has more.
One way to make sense of how respiration works is to compare it to an automobile. Structurally, this car is like your body. Its steel frame is like your skeletal frame. The pipes and hoses work like your circulatory system. Like humans, this machine needs to breathe. It does so by taking gasoline and funneling it to the carburetor, where it is then mixed with oxygen. This mixture creates a small explosion, and it is a series of explosions that make the car run. The byproduct of the gaseous mixture is then released through the tailpipe as exhaust. Similar to an automobile, it is the exchange of gases that keeps us alive and in motion. When we breathe, gases are exchanged between the atmosphere and the alveoli, or the air cells in our lungs. Air flows between the atmosphere and our lungs because a pressure gradient exists. That's the same reason blood flows through our bodies. Before you take a breath, the air pressure in your lungs is equal to the pressure in the atmosphere. But once you inhale, the pressure in your lungs is less. And when you exhale, the pressure in the lungs is greater than the pressure in the atmosphere.
The respiratory system is such that we have 2 major breathing muscles, the diaphragm, and the diaphragm is domed and descends like a piston when we inhale. It's a very powerful muscle, and if the diaphragm is paralyzed, your breathing would be quite difficult. The second set of muscles rotate the ribs like a bucket handle on a bucket and increases the volume of the chest, which then draws in air. And those are the intercostal muscles, the muscles between the ribs. So the chest actually increases its dimensions laterally and front to back, and the diaphragm descends when you inhale. That creates a vacuum which pulls air into the lung. Then when you're through inhaling, you simply let go, and the lung elastic recoil, because of the elastic fibers in the lung, allows it to slowly decrease in volume and empty by itself with no energy required. The chest cage will collapse automatically because it prefers to be in a smaller position and will help to decrease the volume of the lung and empty the lung. And the diaphragm will relax and come back up into a dome shape. So that if these are working, the energy required for the breathing mechanism is about 2% of your energy. It's extremely efficient, and so you're not aware of it.
When we inhale, as soon as our lungs fill with air, oxygen begins to spread from the alveoli, or air sacs, into our blood through the interstitial fluid and into our cells.
The exchange of gases take place in the lungs. What happens when an adult takes a breath, the gas from the atmosphere passes through the trachea, and the trachea continues to divide into smaller and smaller airways. The smallest airway is referred to as an alveolar duct, and that duct brings gas into what's called the alveolar sacs. The alveolar sacs is the actual place that gas exchange takes place between the lung and the blood. The alveolar sacs number in about 300 million for adults. If you were to smooth out the alveolar sacs to see how much gas exchange area there is in the lung, it's about 70 square meters, or the size of a tennis court. And each one of the alveolar sacs is covered by microscopic blood vessels, and the blood and the air do not come into actual contact, but there's a tissue layer where oxygen can diffuse into the blood. It makes that deoxygenated blood into oxygenated blood so it can be circulated through the body again for more metabolism.
The oxygen is used in the cells to produce energy, and a byproduct, a waste, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is then carried in the blood back to the lungs, where another gas exchange takes place, and the used air leaves through the mouth and the nose. I'm Alice Look reporting.
Let's review. The principal purpose of respiration is to supply the body's cells with oxygen and to remove carbon dioxide from the body. The upper respiratory system is comprised of the nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, and bronchi. The lower respiratory system refers to the lungs, diaphragm, and the other related muscles that help us breathe. External respiration refers to the exchange of gases between the environment and the respiratory organs. Internal respiration refers to the exchange of gases between the cells and the blood. Our blood then distributes oxygen to our cells. Cellular respiration is the series of chemical reactions by which a cell breaks down food molecules in order to obtain energy. When we inhale, oxygen spreads from the alveoli through the interstitial fluid into the blood. Oxygen is then distributed to the cells through the blood. When we exhale, the process is reversed.
Take a look at your face. You know that thing in the middle? Well, it's not just a place to hang your glasses. It's the doorstep to a most vital bodily function. Peter Gailey has more.
Though we can breathe in through our mouth, the nose is the main intake for air. It also filters out dirt and particles similar to a car filter. The nose is divided into external and internal parts. The external part of your nose is made up of bone and very pliable cartilage that's covered with skin and lined with mucous membrane. It also contains a large supply of blood vessels used to warm the air before it continues along the respiratory tract. The internal portion of the nose is comprised of a large cavity in the skull that lies below the cranium and above the mouth. It's divided into a left and right side by the nasal septum, which is primarily made of cartilage. It is here that the internal nose merges with the external portions of the nose at the front, while at the back it segues into the throat or pharynx.
The main functions of the nose include warming air as it before it enters the lungs, also humidification of air prior to entry into the lungs, and the nose actually acts as a filter, filtering out particles and debris before they enter the lungs. And so all of these things are really the main functions of the nose.
The pharynx is comprised of skeletal muscles lined with mucous membrane and acts as a passageway for air and food. It also provides a resonating chamber for speech sounds. The pharynx has three parts: the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. The laryngopharynx connects with the esophagus and also joins with the voice box or larynx. The valve at the top of the larynx is called the epiglottis and closes when you swallow so that food does not enter the lower airway and cause you to choke. Your windpipe or trachea is about 4.5 inches long and 1 inch in diameter, and it acts as a passageway for air. It's located at the front of the esophagus and extends from the larynx to the 5th or 6th thoracic vertebra, depending on the person. If the trachea is blocked, it must be cleared quickly. The trachea divides into left and right primary bronchi. The left primary bronchus goes to the left lung, and the right primary bronchus goes to the right lung. Upon entering the lungs, each bronchus begins dividing again into smaller and smaller bronchi, the tiniest of which are called bronchioles. Each bronchiole ends in a small air-filled sac called an alveolus. Millions and millions of alveoli together make up our lungs. From the trachea to the lungs, our branching airways have the appearance of an upside-down tree. I'm Peter Gailey reporting.
Let's review. The nose is the main passage that allows us to breathe air. It warms and filters the air as it's inhaled. The pharynx, or throat, acts as a passageway for air and food and helps form speech sounds. The trachea, or windpipe, is a tubular passageway for air. The primary bronchi are the two large branches of the trachea that lead to the lungs. Our lungs are made up of small air-filled sacs called alveoli.
The lung is the primary breathing organ of the respiratory system. It is through the lungs that our blood receives oxygen and gets rid of carbon dioxide. Ross Joel has more.
The lungs are cone-shaped organs which rest in the thoracic cavity. There are two lungs, and they are separated from each other by the heart and other structures of the mediastinum, which is the centralmost area of the thoracic cavity. Now, each lung is surrounded and protected by two layers of serous membrane, which are collectively referred to as the pleural membrane.
Now, between the lung in the chest cavity and the inside of the chest cavity itself are two membranes known as the pleura. And one is visceral pleura. It's up against the edge of the lung on the outside, coating the entire lung. And the other one is coating the inner chest wall. Those membranes are continuous. They're just one continuous membrane. They're both connected. And in between them is a microscopic layer of water that allows them to slide one against the other without causing pain or discomfort. When you have inflammation of the pleura from a pneumonia or from an injury, you then have sharp pain every time you take a deep breath, and that's because you've inflamed the membrane. And those two membranes are rubbing together in the inflamed area, so every time you take a deep breath or cough, it's extremely painful, like a knife being stuck into your chest.
Your lungs extend from your diaphragm to a point approximately 3/4 of an inch above the clavicles. The lower portion of the lung is broad and is known as the base. It is concave and fits over the convex portion of the diaphragm. The uppermost portion of the lung is narrow. It's called the apex, or the cupula. Both the front and back surfaces of the lungs lie against the rib cage. These surfaces are rounded to match the curvature of the ribs. Each lung is divided into lobes. The right lung has 3 lobes, but the left lung has only 2. The left lung is somewhat smaller because it shares its half of the chest cavity with the heart. What makes us breathe? Well, the rib muscles and the diaphragm contract and relax because of nerve impulses transmitted to them from centers in the brain. These nerve impulses come from the respiratory center of the brain, also known as the breathing center. This area is located in an area of the brainstem called the reticular formation. When there's a certain amount of carbon dioxide in the blood reaching the brain, it triggers the breathing center to send out a signal telling the respiratory muscles to contract. I'm Ross Joel reporting. Let's review. The lung is the primary breathing organ of the respiratory system. The lungs are 2 cone-shaped organs in the thoracic cavity. Each lung is protected by 2 layers of serous membrane called the pleural membrane. The base is the broad lower portion of the lung. The apex is the narrow uppermost part of the lung. The rib muscles and diaphragm contract in response to nerve impulses from a part of the brain known as the breathing center.
You know, it's obvious there's a lot going on inside us to make respiration happen. But what would happen if our airway was to become blocked, or if we stopped breathing altogether? Reporter Carrie Rogers has more.
Although there are several reasons a person could stop breathing, choking is the leading cause of accidental death. When someone chokes on a piece of food, it lodges in the throat, making it impossible for the victim to speak or breathe. Choking occurs most frequently during inhalation, when the food is sucked against the glottis of the larynx, blocking the airway. Without intervention, severe brain damage or death can occur in 4 to 6 minutes. Fortunately, a life-saving procedure called an abdominal thrust or Heimlich maneuver can be performed by any person. This procedure uses the air in a person's own lungs to expel the obstructing piece of food.
The Heimlich maneuver is a method that is used to dislodge a piece of food or a toy that's in someone's airway. They're not able to breathe. Basically, you clench your fists together, put them below the rib cage, and apply an inward and upward thrust, and it's done rapidly so that the air that's in the person's lungs will push whatever is obstructing their airway up and out. Most people will give a universal signal when they have an obstructed airway that they can't breathe, the little choking situation. And hopefully if you do it rapidly enough, the material will be dislodged and they'll breathe normally again.
Although the abdominal thrust is easy to master, there's a distinct possibility of cracking ribs if performed incorrectly. Therefore, it is best to learn the procedure from a certified instructor. Another valuable life-saving tool is called cardiopulmonary resuscitation, or CPR. When a person's heart stops beating, the body is being deprived of oxygen. It is important to take action to get the heart moving again as quickly as possible.
You perform CPR when you come upon someone who is unresponsive. They don't awaken to their name or painful stimulus. And you also need to check to see if they have a pulse and breathing. If none of those are occurring, then you need to start CPR and call for help.
If you are interested in learning how to perform an abdominal thrust, or CPR, contact your local emergency medical squad, fire department, or community college to get information on when classes are being held. I'm Carrie Rogers reporting.
The next time you're riding in a car, think about all of the things that have to happen to make that car move. Then think about your respiratory system and your body's own form of intake and exhaust. Thanks for joining me for this trip through the human body. I'm your host, Mike Dowling.